The world dissolved into a sound. Not a bang, not a crack, but a deafening pop that seemed to suck all the air from the cavernous atrium of the Northwood Galleria. For a frozen heartbeat, the symphony of suburban commerce, the squeak of sneakers, the distant whir of an espresso machine, the saccharine pop music bleeding from a dozen storefronts, went silent, replaced by a singular, violent note. Then came the chaos. Screams erupted, a discordant chorus of panic. Shoppers, moments before adrift in a sea of consumption, became a stampeding herd. Maya Reyes didn't have time to process the source. Her training, buried under months of monotonous patrols and the quiet ache of a life deferred, surged to the surface, hot and absolute. Her eyes, sweeping the scene, didn't see the two masked figures sprinting from the jewelry store, their movements clumsy and terrified. She saw the aftermath. She saw the trajectory. A glint of metal off a marble pillar, a path, a target. Lily. The little girl, no older than 7, stood frozen by the grand fountain, a sketchbook clutched in her small hands. Her bright pink backpack seemed to glow, a beacon in the swirling panic. Her face, which had shared a fleeting, genuine smile with Maya just minutes before, was a mask of pure, uncomprehending terror. Her nanny, jolted from her phone-induced trance, was already scrambling away, her own survival instinct overriding any sense of duty. The world slowed to a crawl. The ricocheting bullet, a tiny harbinger of death, seemed to hang in the air, spinning lazily on its path to the small girl in the pink backpack. There was no time for calculation, no moment for conscious choice. There was only the instinct, the deeply ingrained imperative of a protector. Maya moved. Her slight limp, a souvenir from a dusty road in Afghanistan, vanished. She exploded from her position, her body a blur of focused intent. 3 long, desperate strides. The polished floor was slick beneath her boots. She didn't reach for the girl, didn't call out. She lunged, a human shield launched by pure, unthinking will. She hit Lily with the force of a linebacker, shoving the girl's small, frail body towards the decorative shrubs bordering the fountain. The impact knocked the wind from both of them, but it was the second impact that stole Maya's breath entirely. A searing, white-hot poker slammed into her left shoulder. It wasn't a dull thud. It was a vicious, tearing shock that radiated down her arm and exploded behind her eyes. She heard a choked gasp and realized it was her own. Crashing to the ground, she twisted her body, ensuring she landed on top of Lily, her own frame absorbing the full brunt of the fall onto the hard tile. The scent of chlorinated fountain water and freshly turned soil filled her nostrils. Beneath her, the little girl let out a terrified wail. The sound, more than the fire in her shoulder, grounded Maya. "I got you," she rasped, the words thick in her throat. "You're okay. I got you." The chaotic symphony of the mall returned, now layered with the approaching wail of sirens. Maya's world had shrunk to the size of the small, trembling body beneath her and the growing, wet warmth that was soaking through the fabric of her uniform. Her training, the calm voice of a combat medic instructor from years ago, took over. Assess, secure, treat. She pushed herself up slightly, ignoring the screaming protest of her muscles. Lily's eyes were wide, slick with tears, but she was looking at Maya, not past her. Good, no signs of head trauma. "Are you hurt?" Maya asked, her voice surprisingly steady. The little girl just shook her head, her body racked with sobs. "Okay, my turn." Maya glanced down at her shoulder. The dark blue fabric of her shirt was now almost black, glistening under the harsh mall lights. It was bad. The pain was starting to bloom, a throbbing, nauseating wave that threatened to pull her under. She ripped a piece of her own uniform shirt, gritting her teeth against the fresh agony of the movement, and pressed the makeshift bandage hard against the wound. That's when the first of her new antagonists arrived. The hysterical nanny, having found a moment of courage now that the danger had passed, rushed forward. "Oh my God! Lily, what did you do?" she shrieked, her accusatory gaze fixed on Maya. Before Maya could answer, a shadow fell over them. Officer Miller, a man whose paunch strained the buttons of his uniform, looked down with an expression of profound boredom. He wasn't looking at Maya's wound or the crying child. He was looking at the disruption, the paperwork taking shape in his mind's eye. "All right, ma'am, let the professionals handle this," he said, his voice as flat and gray as the tile floor. "Please step away from the child." "I'm keeping pressure on the wound," Maya said through clenched teeth. "Mine." Miller's eyes flickered to her shoulder, and for the first time, a flicker of something, annoyance, not concern, crossed his face. "You're the guard. You should know better than to interfere. You've contaminated a crime scene." Interfered. The word hung in the air, more absurd than the Cinnabon scent that was beginning to reassert itself. Maya looked from the officer's impassive face to the terrified child she was still shielding. Interfered? But the parade of indifference was just beginning. Mr. Henderson, the mall's general manager, skidded to a halt beside them, his face pale and slick with sweat. His eyes, wide with corporate panic, darted everywhere. "Is there video?" he asked his assistant, who was trailing behind him. "We need to control the narrative, get statements. Legal needs to be looped in." He finally looked down at Maya, his gaze lingering on the blood before flicking away, as if it were an unsightly piece of litter. "Don't speak to anyone," he commanded. "Wait for the corporate incident response team." There was no, "Are you okay?" No, "Thank you for saving that child." There was only liability, exposure, the cold, hard math of risk management. As the paramedics, professional but distant, finally began to work on her, cutting away the ruined shirt, Maya's gaze found Lily. The little girl was being bundled away by the now sobbing nanny. Just before she was lost in the crowd of onlookers, Lily looked back, her tear-streaked face a mixture of fear and awe. Their eyes met for a second, a silent acknowledgement that passed between the protector and the protected. It was the last moment of clarity, the last shred of validation Maya would receive for a very long time. Strapped to a gurney and wheeled towards the exit, Maya overheard one of the paramedics mutter to his partner, "Another wannabe hero, just creates more paperwork for us." The doors to the ambulance slid shut, plunging her into a world of flickering lights and sterile efficiency. The fire in her shoulder was now a roaring inferno, but a different, colder ache was beginning to settle deep in her bones. It was the chilling realization that in a world run by rules and regulations, the single most human act she had ever performed was being logged at not as an act of heroism, but as a procedural error. The emergency room at City General was a finely tuned machine for processing human misery. Every gurney in the hallway held a story of pain, fear, or tragic miscalculation. Maya became just another cog in that machine, parked between a man with a broken leg moaning about his insurance and a woman weeping quietly into her phone. The adrenaline that had carried her through the initial shock had long since dissipated, leaving behind a raw, grinding pain and a bone-deep exhaustion. The bright, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, each flicker a tiny hammer against her skull. After what felt like an eternity, a young orderly wheeled her into a small, curtained-off cubicle. "Doctor will be with you shortly," he said, avoiding her eyes, and then he was gone. Shortly, she would learn, was a relative term in a place like this. She was left to stare at the acoustic tile ceiling, counting the water stains and replaying the events at the mall. The face of the little girl, Lily, swam in her vision. The memory was the only warmth in the cold, sterile room. Finally, the curtain was swept aside and Dr. Evans entered. He was a man in his late 40s with tired eyes and an air of weary authority. He picked up her chart from the foot of the gurney, his eyes scanning it with a brisk, practiced efficiency. He glanced at the notes from the paramedics, then at the remnants of her security guard uniform, and a small, almost imperceptible smirk touched his lips. "Saadaha," he began, not looking at her, but at the chart. "Maya Reyes. Took a bullet for a stranger at the mall. You decided to play hero today?" The question wasn't born of curiosity, it was an accusation. Maya, propped up on one elbow, felt a flash of anger cut through the fog of pain. "A little girl was going to be shot," she said, her voice hoarse. "I didn't decide anything, I just moved." "Right," Dr. Evans said, the single word dripping with condescension. He finally met her eyes. "You do know we have police officers and emergency services for these situations, right? People who are trained and paid to get shot at. When civilians interfere, it usually just makes things more complicated." He gestured vaguely at her shoulder. "Case in point." He was maddeningly competent. His hands were gentle as he cleaned the wound, his movements precise and economical. He explained the bullet had passed clean through the deltoid, missing the bone and major arteries. She was lucky. But his words were a constant, grating counterpoint to his professional touch. He lectured her on the unpredictability of ricochets, the risks of moving a potential victim, the legal quagmire she had created for the mall, and the mountain of paperwork she had now generated for him. It was a masterclass in making a victim feel like a perpetrator. "I was an army medic," Maya finally bit out, the words tasting like ash. "I know how to assess a situation." "This isn't Kandahar, Ms. Reyes," he retorted without missing a beat. "This is a shopping mall, different rules, mostly involving lawyers." He finished dressing the wound and scribbled on his chart. "We'll get you a prescription for the pain and you can be on your way. Try to stay out of the line of fire for a few days, all right?" He gave her a tight, dismissive smile and swept out of the cubicle, leaving a wake of antiseptic-scented humiliation. The final insult arrived before the discharge papers. A woman from billing, her face a mask of practiced empathy, stood by Maya's gurney holding a tablet. "Just a few forms to go over, sweetie," she said, her voice cloyingly sweet. She walked Maya through the labyrinth of her employer-provided insurance. The words high deductible, co-pay, and out-of-network swam before Maya's eyes. The woman's finger tapped on the screen, circling a final, horrifying number. It was Maya's estimated personal responsibility. It was more than $2,000. "But I was injured at work," Maya stammered, her head spinning. "This should be covered by workers' comp." "Oh, absolutely," the woman chirped. "You just have to pay the deductible up front, and then the claims process can take anywhere from 6 to 18 months. Sometimes they deny it on the first go-round, so you have to appeal. It's a whole process." She smiled as if explaining the rules of a fun new board game. "We do offer payment plans, though." Discharged with her arm in a sling, a prescription for painkillers she now knew she couldn't afford, and a bill that felt like a death sentence, Maya walked out into the cool night air. The city lights seemed harsh and alien. She took a cab back to her small, second-floor apartment, each bump and turn sending a fresh spike of agony through her shoulder. The physical pain, however, was nothing compared to the hollow, sickening ache of her newfound reality. The world didn't reward heroes. It sent them the bill. The next morning, she woke to the shrill, insistent ring of her phone. It was a number she didn't recognize, but it had the mall's exchange. Groggily, she answered. "Maya, hi, it's Karen from HR." The voice on the other end was aggressively cheerful, a weapon of corporate insincerity. "Hope you're feeling better. We just need you to pop into the corporate office for a quick post-incident debriefing. It's mandatory. See you at 10. The line went dead before Maya could even form a response. Mandatory. The word echoed in her throbbing head. The mall's corporate office was located in a soulless glass tower a few miles away. It was all polished chrome, muted gray carpets, and abstract art that looked expensive and meaningless. It was a world designed to insulate itself from the messy realities of life, like blood on a tile floor. Maya, in her jeans and a loose-fitting t-shirt, her arm cradled in the cheap hospital-issued sling, felt like a contaminant in this sterile environment. She was led into a conference room with a large mahogany table that gleamed under recessed lighting. Mr. Henderson was already there, staring intently at a stack of papers. He didn't look up when she entered. A moment later, Karen breezed in, carrying a leather-bound portfolio and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Maya, thanks for coming in," she began, taking a seat opposite her. "First and foremost, on behalf of the entire Northwood Galleria family, we want to thank you for your involvement in yesterday's events." The carefully chosen word hung in the air. Involvement, not bravery, not heroism. "I was doing my job," Maya said, her voice flat. "Protecting a patron." Henderson finally looked up, his face a mask of grim displeasure. "Your job is to observe and report, Reyes," he growled. "Not to play commando." Karen placed a placating hand on his arm, though the gesture was for Maya's benefit. "What Mr. Henderson means is that we have very specific protocols for a reason. And, well, this is the difficult part." She slid a copy of the thick employee handbook across the polished table. A section was highlighted in garish yellow. After a thorough review with our legal team and our insurance underwriters, we've determined that your actions were in direct violation of company policy. Section 7, subsection B. Employees are to maintain a safe distance and immediately notify law enforcement. Under no circumstances should an employee physically intervene in a dangerous situation. Maya stared at the highlighted text, then back at their faces. There was no time, she said, Kia, her voice shaking with a mixture of pain and disbelief. The bullet was going to kill that little girl. There was no time to call anyone. We understand your intentions were noble, Maya. We truly do, Karen said, her voice dripping with a sympathy so false it was physically repellent. But your actions exposed the company to a staggering liability. What if, in shoving the child, you had inadvertently caused an injury? A concussion? A broken arm? What if you had been more seriously injured or killed? Our insurance premiums would be astronomical. You created a massive security and public relations incident. Maya felt like she had been plunged into an alternate reality where up was down and saving a life was a fireable offense. She opened her mouth to argue, to scream, but no words came out. Karen slid a plain white folder across the table. It landed with a soft, final thud. Unfortunately, due to this gross violation of protocol, we have no choice but to terminate your employment, effective immediately. The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. Fired. She was being fired for saving a child's life. To show our appreciation for your time with us, Karen continued, her voice never losing its cheerful cadence, we are classifying this as a for-cause termination, which means you won't be eligible for severance or unemployment benefits. However, as a gesture of goodwill, we will not contest your workers' compensation claim for the injury. The magnanimity of the offer was breathtaking. They wouldn't fight her on the injury they were firing her for sustaining while doing the job they hired her to do. Maya was numb. She watched as if from a great distance as they made her sign a form acknowledging her termination. They took her ID badge and the keycard to the employee locker room. She walked out of the conference room and through the pristine lobby in a daze. The receptionist offered her a bright, professional smile. The security guard at the front desk nodded politely. None of them knew. None of them could possibly understand the sheer, soul-crushing injustice of what had just happened. As the glass doors slid shut behind her, Maya stood on the concrete plaza, the city noise a dull roar in her ears. The sling on her arm, once a badge of honor, now felt like a mark of shame. She had taken a bullet for a stranger, and in return, the world had taken everything else. Maya's apartment, once a sanctuary from the world, now felt like a cage. The four walls seemed to be closing in, each object a testament to her failure. On the small kitchen counter, the stark white of her termination papers lay next to a pale pink eviction notice that had arrived 2 days ago. It was a perfect storm of despair. She sank onto her lumpy sofa, the movement sending a jolt of pain through her shoulder. But the physical ache was a dim echo of the hollowing cavern that had opened in her chest. She flicked on the small television, hoping for a distraction, some mindless noise to fill the suffocating silence. The local news was on. Her heart seized as a picture of the Northwood Galleria flashed on the screen. A well-coiffed anchorwoman was recapping yesterday's events. Thanks to the swift response of mall security and local law enforcement, the anchor said with practiced gravity, the 2 suspects in yesterday's attempted robbery were apprehended within minutes. The mall has been praised for its robust security protocols, which ensured no patrons were seriously harmed. A graphic appeared with the mall's logo and the words, "A safe shopping experience." The report continued. Sources say a security guard sustained a minor injury during the incident, but is expected to make a full recovery. A minor injury. No patrons were seriously harmed. Her name, her face, her sacrifice, erased. Wiped clean from the official record and replaced with a corporate-approved narrative that was as neat and tidy as it was a complete lie. She wasn't a person. She was a footnote, an inconvenient detail that had been smoothed over to protect a brand. A wave of nausea rolled over her. She felt invisible, disposable. For a terrifying, fleeting moment, she wondered if Dr. Evans had been right. What if she had just stayed put? What if she had just observed and reported? Lily would be... She couldn't complete the thought. The image of the little girl's terrified face flashed in her mind, and a different feeling pushed through the despair. A defiant, stubborn spark of certainty. She would do it again, in a heartbeat, even knowing everything that would follow. She looked over at the single-framed photograph on her bookshelf. Her and her army unit, a group of tired, dusty kids grinning in the Afghan sun. They were a team. They had each other's backs. It was a code she still lived by, even if the world she lived in now didn't understand it. That's when the knock came. It wasn't the tentative rap of a neighbor or the lazy thud of a delivery person. It was a sharp, authoritative rat-a-tat-tat, a sound that demanded a response. It was the kind of knock that meant business. Assuming it was the landlord coming to follow up on the eviction notice with a fresh set of threats, Maya hauled herself off the couch with a groan and pulled open the door. The man standing in the dingy, poorly lit hallway was so out of place he seemed to have been photoshopped into the scene. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit that probably cost more than her car, with a face that was a study in controlled neutrality. Beside him stood a woman, slightly shorter but with the same air of sharp, focused intensity. They were a stark, formidable contrast to the peeling paint and worn linoleum of the apartment building. "Maya Reyes?" the man asked. His voice was calm, deep, and carried an undeniable weight of authority. "Who's asking?" Maya replied, her hand instinctively tightening on the doorknob. The man and woman simultaneously reached into their jackets and produced leather wallets, flipping them open to reveal credentials. Gold badges gleamed under the flickering fluorescent light. "I'm Agent Sterling," the man said. "This is Agent Cho. United States Secret Service. May we come in?" The words seemed to hang in the stale air of the hallway. Secret Service? Maya's mind, already reeling, struggled to process the information. The robbers? Were they more than just clumsy thieves? Was she somehow in more trouble? She was so far down she couldn't imagine there was any further to fall, but the sudden appearance of federal agents suggested otherwise. Wordlessly, she stepped back, holding the door open. They entered her small apartment, moving with a fluid grace that spoke of years of training. Their presence seemed to suck the air out of the room, making it feel even smaller. Agent Sterling's eyes, a cool, penetrating gray, missed nothing. He scanned the room in a single, sweeping glance, taking in the eviction notice, the termination papers on the counter, the framed army photograph, the sling on her arm. It was the look of a man who could deconstruct a person's life in 5 seconds. "Please, have a seat," Maya said, gesturing vaguely toward the sofa. It felt absurd to be offering hospitality to these people. They remained standing. "We're not here about the robbery, Ms. Reyes," Sterling began, getting straight to the point. "We're here about you." "I already gave my statement to the police," she said, her voice wary. "The police were interested in a smash and grab," Agent Cho interjected, her voice softer than her partner's but no less firm. "Our interests are different. We've reviewed the full, unedited security footage from the mall, from every angle." A knot of anxiety tightened in Maya's stomach. What had they seen? What were they looking for? Sterling took a step closer. "The little girl you saved," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "Her name is Lily." He paused. "Her full name is Lillian Prescott." The name meant nothing to Maya. She just stared at him blankly. "Her father is Christopher Prescott," Sterling continued, his voice dropping slightly. "He's the Speaker of the House of Representatives." The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. It was as if a bomb had gone off in her tiny apartment, rearranging the very molecules of her reality. The Speaker of the House, the third most powerful politician in the country, the nanny's over-the-top panic, Henderson's frantic obsession with PR, the sanitized news report, it all snapped into focus with sickening clarity. She hadn't just saved a little girl, she had saved a political dynasty's most precious asset. "We know everything, Ms. Reyes," Sterling said, his voice quiet but intense. And then he began to list it all, a litany of her private humiliations. We know they fired you. We have a transcript of your meeting with Mr. Henderson and the HR representative. We know the hospital is trying to saddle you with a $2,000 bill for an on-the-job injury. We know Officer Miller dismissed your actions and filed a report that conveniently ignored your heroism. We know you're facing eviction. Maya stared at him, speechless. The feeling of being watched, of being a pawn in a game she didn't understand, was overwhelming. But underneath it, something else was stirring. For 36 hours, she had been dismissed, belittled, and discarded. She had been made to feel like a fool and a liability. Now, these two serious, powerful people were standing in her living room, telling her they saw everything. They saw the truth. A strange, unfamiliar wave of vindication washed over her. She wasn't invisible after all. Sterling's expression remained unreadable, but there was a subtle shift in his tone. Your actions, Ms. Reyes, while a violation of your former employer's pathetic policy, were, from our perspective, exemplary. You showed quick thinking, courage under fire, and a complete disregard for your own safety to protect a child. He let the words hang in the air, a stark contrast to every other official judgment she had received. The speaker and his family would like to meet you, he said. They want to thank you personally. He paused, taking another small step forward, his gaze unwavering. But first, we have a proposition for you. The word proposition hung in the air, charged with 100 different possibilities. Maya's mind, conditioned by the last 2 days of relentless negativity, braced for another catch, another cruel twist. But what Agent Sterling proposed was so far beyond the realm of her recent experience that it barely seemed real. The Secret Service maintains a number of specialized units, he explained, his voice a low, serious monotone. Given the credible ongoing threats against the speaker's family and the demonstrated failure of private security to adequately protect them, we are looking to recruit individuals with a very specific skill set. Your file says you were an Army medic. Distinguished record. He hadn't asked. He knew. Of course he knew. Your actions at the mall showed more than just bravery, Agent Cho added, stepping forward slightly. They showed tactical instinct and the ability to perform under extreme pressure. Those are qualities we value. Sterling's gaze was direct and piercing. We'd like to offer you a position, Ms. Reyes, a spot in a highly competitive, fully funded training program for our emergency response team. It's a fast track. Your medical background gives you a significant advantage. It's a path to a real career. A career where your skills are an asset, not a liability. Maya stared at them, her mouth slightly agape. A career. The Secret Service. It was an idea so preposterous, so utterly divorced from her current reality of eviction notices and termination papers, that she almost laughed. But they weren't smiling. They were deadly serious. As she struggled to formulate a response, to wrap her head around the sheer magnitude of the offer, Agent Cho's phone emitted a quiet buzz. She glanced at the screen, listened for a moment to the person on the other end of her earpiece, and then looked at Sterling. A small, almost imperceptible nod passed between them. It's done, Cho said quietly. What's done? Maya asked, confused. A faint smile, the first genuine expression Maya had seen from either of them, touched Agent Sterling's lips. Let's call it administrative cleanup, he said. He gestured to the small television in the corner. You might want to turn that back on, Channel 4. Hesitantly, Maya picked up the remote and flicked the TV on. The local news was in the middle of a breaking report. The same anchorwoman who had erased Maya's existence hours earlier was now on screen, her face a mask of breathless excitement. We have a stunning reversal in the story of yesterday's mall shooting, the anchorwoman announced. Sources high up in federal law enforcement have just released new details, hailing security guard Maya Reyes as a true American hero. Maya's driver's license photo, grainy and years old, flashed on the screen. We're now learning that Ms. Reyes, a decorated Army veteran, sustained a significant gunshot wound while shielding the 7-year-old daughter of Speaker of the House Christopher Prescott from harm. The screen cut to a shot of the Northwood Galleria, where a different reporter was standing live. An absolute firestorm of controversy has erupted here today, the reporter said. The mall's parent company, Global Retail Holdings, has just issued a statement firing the general manager, a Mr. Henderson, and publicly apologizing to Ms. Reyes. They are calling her termination a grievous and inexcusable error in judgment by local management and have offered her a full reinstatement with a promotion and back pay. Maya's jaw hung open. It was a dizzying, whiplash-inducing reversal of fortune. But it wasn't over. Her phone, which had been silent all day, suddenly buzzed. It was an email. The subject line read, "An urgent message from City General Hospital." She opened it. The formal, jargon-filled text announced that in light of her extraordinary civil service, the hospital's board of directors had voted unanimously to forgive her entire medical bill as a gesture of our deep admiration and community support. As she was reading, another news alert scrolled across the bottom of the TV screen. City Police Department launches internal investigation into handling of mall shooting. Officer at scene reassigned to desk duty, pending review. It was a tidal wave of vindication, a systematic demolition of every injustice she had suffered. The rage that had been simmering inside her for 2 days, the impotent fury at a system that had chewed her up and spit her out, finally had a release valve. It wasn't just that she was being proven right. It was that the people who had wronged her were facing immediate public consequences. She looked from the TV to the two agents standing impassively in her living room. This wasn't just luck. This was power. The kind of power that could reshape reality with a few quiet phone calls. "The speaker is a very persuasive man," Agent Sterling said, "a master of understatement. He doesn't like it when his family is put at risk. And he especially doesn't like it when the people who help his family are punished for it." The proposition for the Secret Service job now seemed less like a random opportunity and more like the logical next step in a world that had suddenly, violently, been put right. An hour later, Maya was no longer in her own apartment. She was sitting in the back of a black, government-issue SUV watching the city lights blur past. She wore a new set of clothes, a simple, respectable blouse and slacks that Agent Cho had produced from a garment bag, insisting that she dress for the occasion. The cheap hospital sling had been replaced with a more professional one. It was a Cinderella story, but one orchestrated by federal agents instead of a fairy godmother. The SUV didn't pull up to a grand government building, but to a discreet, heavily secured private residence in a wealthy suburb. The air here was different, cleaner, quieter. Inside, the home was elegant but clearly lived in. It was a family home, not a political stage. Speaker of the House Christopher Prescott was waiting for them. In person, he looked older than he did on television, his face etched with the lines of stress and sleepless nights. But as he approached Maya, all the political artifice fell away. He was simply a father. He took her hand in both of his grip firm, his eyes shining with a raw, profound gratitude that felt more real than anything she had experienced in years. "Ms. Reyes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "There are no words. Thank you isn't enough. What you did for my daughter, for my family." He trailed off, shaking his head, unable to articulate the depth of his feelings. But the most powerful moment was yet to come. A small figure appeared in the doorway, clutching a piece of paper. It was Lily. She was wearing pajamas with little cartoon stars on them. She wasn't shy or scared. Her eyes, clear and bright, found Maya's. She walked directly to her and, without a word, wrapped her small arms around Maya's waist, hugging her tightly. Then she stepped back and held out the piece of paper. It was a drawing, rendered in the beautifully clumsy style of a 7-year-old. A large, smiling figure in what was clearly a security guard uniform stood with arms outstretched, shielding a much smaller figure from a chaotic, angry-looking black scribble on the side of the page. Above the drawing, in shaky, oversized letters, were 2 words: "My hero." Maya took the drawing, her fingers tracing the crayon lines. And then the dam broke. The tears she had refused to shed in the face of pain, condescension, and betrayal finally came, hot and cleansing. They weren't tears of sadness or anger, but of overwhelming, cathartic relief. This was it. This was the only validation she had ever truly needed. The thanks of a grateful father was one thing. The simple, pure, unvarnished gratitude of the child whose life she had saved was everything. "Our country needs people like you, Ms. Reyes," Speaker Prescott said quietly, placing a gentle hand on her good shoulder. The offer from the service. I hope you'll take it. We'd be lucky to have you. Looking down at the crayon drawing in her hand, Maya Reyes knew that her life had been irrevocably, astonishingly changed forever. She had found her purpose not in a policy manual or a corporate mission statement, but in a single, selfless act and the simple drawing it had inspired. The sterile beige world of the corporate office and the antiseptic chill of the hospital faded into a distant, unpleasant memory. Maya's new world was one of manicured lawns, polished brass, and the low, constant hum of focused energy. The James J. Rowley Training Center in Beltsville, Maryland, was a place where purpose was the currency and excellence was the standard. She formally accepted the Secret Service's proposition the day after meeting the Prescotts. Within a week, her life was packed into boxes and she was on a plane to a new reality. The training was grueling, more demanding than anything she had experienced since basic training. But here, her past was not a curiosity. It was a qualification. Her medical skills, honed in the chaos of a combat zone, made her a standout in tactical emergency casualty care drills. Her ingrained calm under pressure, the very thing that had been deemed a liability by Mr. Henderson, was now lauded by her instructors as an invaluable asset. The slight limp she had once tried to hide was gone, worked out through hours of targeted physical therapy with the service's top trainers. She was no longer the lone guard, the disposable employee. She was part of a team, a highly skilled, deeply dedicated group of men and women who understood the unspoken code she lived by. They had each other's backs. There were no Karens with insincere smiles, no dismissive Dr. Evanses, no by-the-book Officer Millers. There was only the mission. Months melted into a year. The transformation was total. One crisp autumn afternoon, Maya stood on a secure perimeter, her eyes scanning the crowd. She wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit, an earpiece nestled in her ear, her posture a study in relaxed vigilance. She was part of a security detail for a public dedication ceremony, a mid-level assignment that was a crucial step in her career. Her gaze swept over the faces in the crowd, families, tourists, protesters, supporters. She saw a mother adjust the collar on her young son's jacket, a small, unconscious gesture of protection. A quiet smile touched Maya's lips. She remembered the rage, the bitter sting of injustice. It felt like a lifetime ago, a story that had happened to someone else. The rage had been a fire, but it had not consumed her. Instead, it had forged her. The voice of her team lead crackled in her ear, calm and professional, giving an update. Maya's eyes continued their slow, steady sweep. She was no longer a victim of a system that had failed her. She was a guardian, a quiet, watchful protector standing on the wall. She had been fired for being a hero, but in losing that job, she had found her true calling. The world had tried to crush her for a single act of selfless instinct, but that same instinct had opened a door to a life of purpose she could never have imagined. The final, satisfying truth was that her integrity, tested and punished, had been the one thing that was truly bulletproof. And as she stood her post calm and ready, she knew she was exactly where she was supposed to be,